afternoon. Today we will continue discussing the model of outsourcing, then subsequently we will discuss the gains of outsourcing and also distinguish between manufacturing outsourcing and service outsourcing. Outsourcing is trade in intermediate products, and now many firms in the developed nations, they tend to outsource a part of their production process to the developing nations. Firms existing in developing nations, and they do it because they think that by transferring a part of the production process they can reduce their costs. The assumption here is of course that the wages that prevail in the developing nations are lower than the wages which prevail in the developed nation. So when a firm in the developed nation outsources a part of the production process, it will lead to the eventually to lower production of the entire good. Now you can see this model of outsourcing. These are activities which are ranked by order in production. So any production process will start with the R&D, research and development, then there will be component production, as in case of say TV or production of cellular phone, then assembly, and then finally marketing and sales. Now this R&D and marketing sales are generally skill intensive activities, while it is considered that component production and assembly are more unskilled intensive jobs. And the firms in the developed nation tend to outsource a part of the production process. They slice the value chain, and the component production and assembly is done in the foreign country, while marketing and sales and R&D, which is little skilled or more skilled job, is undertaken at home. Here the assumption is home is a country which is skilled intensive, while foreign is unskilled intensive country. Now yesterday we saw that if outsourcing is done, basically manufacturing outsourcing, and I will distinguish later on the service outsourcing, because countries like India are gaining from service outsourcing. Whether it is the call centers or medical transcriptions or back office operations, Indians are providing service to the developed nation, and these jobs are sometimes more skilled intensive. So there is a distinction between service outsourcing and manufacturing outsourcing. I am talking of manufacturing outsourcing. So it is like a car which is to be produced in US, but a part of the car production, whether it is assembly or component production, is done in another country, say for example Mexico. Now the impact that it will have on the wages is something that needs to be understood and explained. Yesterday we saw me giving an example where the student who had joined a science stream was not doing well, so he pulled down the average marks of that particular class. Now if that student decides to move from the science stream to say humanities and social science, say economic stream, he comes to the economic stream and starts doing well, because he had the background of science, that is maths and stats, and in economics lot of maths and stats is being used. So he starts doing well in the economics discipline. Now the resulting effect is the place from where he left, that is the science stream, because he wasn't doing well, his marks were below the average marks of his class. When he moves out, the average marks goes up in the science stream, and in the economic stream, because he was doing well, his marks were above average, it pulled up the average. So you see that the average marks in both streams increased, whether it is science stream or in the economic stream. So similarly, when a firm in a developed nation outsources a part of the production process because it thinks that component production and assembly can be done in foreign country at a lower cost, what it does is that in its own country, in the home country, now the type of jobs are the leftover jobs are more skilled intensive, so it will require more of skilled labor. So when you demand more of skilled labor, the wages in the developed nation goes up, and something similar happens in the foreign country, where the unskilled intensive job from the point of view of the developed nation is taken up by the foreigners. Foreigners here are the developing nation, but because these are considered to be unskilled intensive from the Western point of view, it may turn out that assembly or component production is skilled intensive in context of the developing nations. So here also there will be a demand for skilled labor. As a result, the wages in in the developing nation, wages of the skilled labor in the developing nation also goes up. So here it is different from the Heckscher-Ohlin in this context, that in the Heckscher-Ohlin you will see that eventually you will see a factor price equalization, but here the wages of the skilled labor goes up. So from outsourcing, it seems that the skilled labor gains, the unskilled labor loses. Now whether this is true empirically, this is something that we need to understand and study. So Feenstra and Taylor take up the example of US and Mexico, and they find that in the US, especially from the mid 80s, they have seen an increase in the wages of the skilled labor. But at the same time, what is interesting to find is that the demand has gone up. Now generally, if you hear that the wages of skilled labor is going up, and you would then think that if the wages of skilled labor goes up, the demand for skilled labor is going down. But it is not the case. In US, the wages of skilled labor from the mid 80s have gone up, and so is the demand for labor. This would mean if you draw a diagram, this would mean a shift of the rightward shift of the demand curve. So I will show you some slides which will tell you how the relative wage rates are determined. Now if you see, on the left side is home country's example, on the right side is the foreign country. Home country is skilled intensive, foreign country is unskilled intensive. Foreign country has a lower wages as far as unskilled labor is concerned, and home country, because it is skilled in labor. We will see how the wages are determined. So on the y axis you have skilled to unskilled wage, that is Ws by Wl. On the x axis you have skilled to unskilled labor. Now, see what happens that in the home country with outsourcing, there is a shift of the demand curve. So, there is an increase in demand for labor and there is an increase in the skilled to unskilled wage. So, you can see that as the relative demand increases, because the jobs done at home are now more skill intensive than before, the relative wage of skilled labor increases due to outsourcing. So, this is what happens in the home country. In the foreign country, the activities which are outsourced to foreign are more skill intensive. So, on average economic activity in foreign is more skilled intensive. So, the relative demand for skilled labor increases. So, as a result, the relative wage of skilled labor increases in foreign country as well. So, this is one of the results of outsourcing, that the demand for skilled labor increases. So, the relative wage rate of the skilled labor goes up. So, one reason that you see the gap between the wages of the skilled and unskilled labor increasing is because of trade in intermediate products or outsourcing. There are other reasons. I am not claiming that this may be the only reason that outsourcing leads to an increase in gap between skilled and unskilled labor. There may be advent of, say, skilled intensive technological progress, which would lead to higher demand for skilled labor. That may be another reason, or maybe because the price of the non traded goods goes up, that may also lead to a rise in the inequality between the wages of the skilled and the unskilled labor. But for US it seems that from the early 80s the wages of skilled workers have risen relative to those of unskilled workers in the US as well as other countries. Now, this is a phenomena which you can see in the developing countries also. From the 80s the inequality of income has gone up, but it is also true that in the US this inequality has gone up. Now, using data for the manufacturing sector on production, that is unskilled, and non-production, that is skilled workers, you can see the figures which shows the average annual earnings of non-production worker, which is skilled, relative to production workers in US manufacturing from 58 to 2001. And the figure will show a steady increase in the ratio of non-production to production workers employed in US manufacturing until the early 1980s. So, you can see that is the relative wage of the skilled to unskilled. It is here, from here you can see that the wage of the skilled to unskilled labor has gone up in the US. What is also interesting is that the relative employment level from the 80s have also gone up. It had come down from 90s, but again if you fit a regression line, it will show an upward trend. So, two things: wages have gone up and as well as the demand for labor has gone up. This would mean that there will be a rightward shift of the demand curve for labor, which can explain an increase in wage of the skilled labor in the US. Now, if you go for the explanations, the evidence from the manufacturing sector in the US is strongly consistent with the model of outsourcing. Another possible explanation, as I said, is called the skill biased technological change, which means that increased use of computers, which leads to higher demand for the skilled labor. Question is, another interesting question is, which factor has had a bigger impact on wage inequalities? Now, we will come back to those questions on this. Now, if you look at the percentage of total increase explained by each factor, that is outsourcing and high technology equipment, if you work out the share of wage payments going to non-production workers, as a share of capital stock, outsourcing has contributed 20 to 23%, high technology equipment explains 8 to 12%, but as a share of capital flow, outsourcing contributes 13% and high technology equipment 37%. Part B, if relative wage of non-production to production workers, the share of outsourcing is 21 to 27%, high technology equipment is 29 to 30%, for outsourcing is 12% and high technology equipment is 99%. So you cannot say with certainty that which factor has contributed more to the rise in inequality. So it is difficult to judge which is more important, because the results depend on how we measure the high tech equipment. So, but what is very clear is that the inequality in the US has increased, and there are reasons for it, and the two reasons here are the outsourcing, and the other is the adoption of computers in the manufacturing sector. So what this was about US. Now when you talk of manufacturing outsourcing, it is interesting to look at the case in Mexico. What happens to the relative wage of non-production labor in Mexico from 64 to 94? So the data comes from the census of industries in Mexico, which occurs infrequently. We can see that the data seem to follow the same trends that we saw in the United States. If you look at the relative wage rates in Mexico, you can see that from 64 it went down from in 84 till 84, and then subsequently it rose. So as I said, one reason is because this is the time when manufacturing outsourcing started taking place, leading to an increase in demand for skilled labor in Mexico, because the type of jobs which were being outsourced to Mexico was considered to be skilled intensive in Mexico. It was considered to be unskilled intensive in US, and therefore it was transferred to Mexico, because Mexicans had lower wages. So from the mid 90s you can see that there is a manufacturing outsourcing taking place. So after 1994, the change in the relative wage of non-production workers in Mexico depends on whether we look at the maquiladora sector or the non-maquiladora sectors. Now this maquiladora sector represents plants near Mexico's border with the US engaged in outsourcing. So this sector are a set of industries which are at the border of the United States. Now at least for this sector we see that the wages for the non-production workers have risen. Non-production workers are skilled workers. For the non-maquiladora plants which are far away from the border, the evidence is that the relative wage of non-production workers have fallen after 1994. So for Mexico we see a rise in the wage of the skilled workers, but only for a particular group of industries which are closer to the border of the United States. So then we have shown that outsourcing can shift the relative demand for labor and raise the wage for unskilled workers, decreasing the relative wage for unskilled workers. However, outsourcing, because it reduces the production cost, because you can transfer the unskilled labor intensive job to the foreign country, because it has lower wages, it reduces prices, so outsourcing benefits consumers. So it is not only the firm in the developed nation which is gaining, it is also the consumers which are gaining, because you can finally get a product at a lower price. For the nation who is providing these services, say India or many of the developing nations, it is also a gain, because now they can do a job efficiently, they can employ their own workers, they can employ their own factors of production, produce goods and increase their productivity. So, question is, what is the overall gain? Does the overall gain outweigh the losses? So, now we move to the next section. The next question is the gains from the outsourcing. Now, here you will see that when I describe the gains, I will take the Heckscher-Ohlin model. I will bring the Heckscher-Ohlin model in the picture, because here you would assume that there are two countries, there are two products and there are two factors of production. The two goods are components, one is component production and the second is R&D intensive product, which can be a TV, which can be a computer and so on and so forth. So, you have two goods, you have two factors of production which are skilled worker and you have unskilled worker, and you have two countries, say US and Mexico. Now, if you want to show the gains of trade under the Heckscher-Ohlin banner, you have to bring in the production possibility frontier. Now, the production possibility frontier will show a trade off between the two goods which are R&D intensive, the other is the component production. And you can see for the general case, the PPF is concave to origin, the slope of the PPF, which is the relative prices, when you move from left to right it increases. So, this is a no trade situation. The no trade situation is this. Now, the difference is between the earlier diagrams that we have discussed and this diagram is that there is a PPF which is concave to the origin, depicting that if you move from left to right, the relative price of component goes up. Relative price of component is PC by PR. The difference here, generally you have an indifference curve, but here you depict the home market isochorns. Please recall, the isochron shows different combinations of capital and labor or the factors of production which will give you the same level of output. So, this is an isochron depicting a certain level of output of components and R&D. So, this is a no trade situation. Now, see what happens when outsourcing takes place. Outsourcing will only take place if in the US the producers of R&D intensive good know that with trade they will get higher price for R&D, or the gain can be that now with trade they can import components at a lower cost. So, they have outsourced component production to the foreigners, and they have done it because they can produce the goods at a lower cost. If they can import the components at a lower cost and if they can get a higher price for an R&D intensive product, then it is a gain for the home or the firm in the developed nation. Now, what would it mean? If you get a higher price for R&D, that means if you work out the relative price of component, it will go down. So, you will see that this relative price of component, this tangent curve will shift, it will become more flatter, and the new equilibrium point with trade would be the new equilibrium point with trade would be, rather than A, it would be B, because now the exporters get a higher price for their R&D, so they can produce more of R&D and they can export this much of R&D and import this much of component at a lower cost. Now you can see the isocont here at C is to the right of the old isocont, meaning that if the isocont moves to the right, it means that you can produce more of both the goods. So at the end, the gain is that the countries can efficiently produce the goods, import goods at a lower cost, and at the end produce more of the goods at a new relative price. So these are the gains, which means that the firm will export R&D and import component. The increase in production from Y0 to Y1 are the gains from outsourcing. So the gains that you, because when you efficiently start producing, you start producing more of the good in which you have a comparative advantage. Similar for foreigners, they are unskilled labor intensive, so they can produce components efficiently, they produce it, they sell it at a lower price. So both countries gain, and finally you will see that the increase in production from Y0 to Y1 are the gains from outsourcing. So this, you can see, this is a similar diagram as we saw when we were discussing the Heckscher-Ohlin model. Remember the Heckscher-Ohlin model, it said that a country exports the good which uses intensively its abundant factor and imports the good which uses intensively its scarce factor. So here is US, which was skilled in labor, it exports the good which uses intensively its abundant factor, that is skilled labor, so it exports R&D intensive good, and imports the good which uses intensively its scarce factor, which is unskilled labor intensive good, which is the components. Further, we need to consider the impact of this outsourcing, that is trade in intermediate product, on the terms of trade. Now recall, what is the terms of trade? Terms of trade of a country is the price of exports by price of imports. Now there are two sets of arguments. One, if the technological progress in the foreign country takes place in the component sector, so it would lead to a reduction in the price of component to price of the R&D product in their country. And remember, whatever is the terms of trade of the foreigners, the inverse of it is the terms of trade of the home. So if the technological progress takes place in the component sector, there are further gains of outsourcing for the home country. Now that you would see, if there are further gains, you would see that the world relative price of component has became more flatter. Home is now producing more of R&D, importing more of components, and the home gains from trade when relative price of component falls. So this is a case where technological progress takes place in the component sector in the foreign country. So it is like Mexicans who does technological progress, but it leads to a fall in terms of trade in their country and a rise in terms of trade in the home country. But there is a second possibility. That second possibility is that the technological progress in the foreign country, in the developing country, takes place in the R&D sector. Now this is what Paul Samuelson, the famous Nobel laureate, was saying, that Indians who have done quite well in terms of the IT services, and because it has a vibrant education sector, it has been able to have an abundance in skilled labor over time, there is a possibility that technological progress takes place in the R&D sector of the foreign country, which would mean that the terms of trade in the foreign country improves. If the terms of trade in the foreign country improves, the terms of trade in the home country would go down, because the terms of trade in home is the reciprocal of the terms of trade in the foreign country. Now see what happens. Now you see an opposite result, where the terms of trade in the US has fallen because the technological progress has taken place in the sector in which foreigners did not have an comparative advantage earlier. So it is like Indians who were rich in say unskilled labor, but over time, because of its vibrant educational sector, it has become more skilled intensive. So technological progress takes place in the sector in which it did not have a comparative advantage. As a result, foreigners' terms of trade, or the developing countries or the Indians' terms of trade goes up, the US terms of trade falls. As a result, they lose, and they come to a point like B double dash, where they export less of R&D capital intensive good and import less of components from the developing nation. So the terms of trade loss leads to reduced production to Y3 and reduced exports and imports of the R&D. So Paul Samuelson was concerned about the falling terms of trade because of the technological progress that takes place in the foreign country in the sector in which it did not have a comparative advantage. So this was the concern of Paul Samuelson, but at the end there are still home gains from outsourcing at C double dash as compared to the no trade equilibrium. So this is a standard result, that if you trade, you will be gaining as compared to the no trade equilibrium. Now what is to be seen is empirically an application is whether do you see an evidence for the US to test the Samuelson's theoretical argument. That Samuelson's theoretical argument was that do you see a fall in the terms of trade of the US. Now the empirical results will show that this is not true. Figure shows that the terms of trade for the US for merchandise goods and for service prices, for trade and services such as R&D, it is very difficult to measure the prices in trade. However, we can collect good data on air travel. So the terms of trade in air travel equals the price that foreigners pay for travel on US airlines divided by the price that Americans pay on foreign airlines. So this is just a proxy for the terms of trade for service in the service sector. For merchandise prices, there is terms of trade price of exports of merchandise, price of imports of merchandise. But for services, because no readily available data is one can get, so the terms of trade in air travel is taken as a proxy for the terms of trade in the service sector, and it equals the price that foreigners pay for travel on US airlines divided by the price that Americans pay on foreign airlines, and here is the data. Now Samuelson was concerned that with an increase in outsourcing, there is a possibility that the technological progress in the developing nation would lead to a reduction in terms of trade in the US. But for merchandise goods, you can see from the mid 90s, the terms of trade, instead of falling, it has gone up. even for air travel after 2003 the terms of trade has improved. So, one cannot say with certainty that the terms of trade have fallen in the US. Now, even if you see the total exports and imports of services, you can if you work out the total exports under different services, computer and information, starting from computer and information services to management and consulting services, educational services, financial services, telecommunications, travel, passenger fares, transportation, royalty, you will see that if you sum up, the total exports of US are greater than the total imports of services. So, one cannot say that when you have a surplus in the trade and services, at least in that time period, that you would see a fall in the US terms of trade. Now, you can the trade surplus in the service sector, you can also see for India from 1996 there is a surplus. For United Kingdom and US, again you see an upward trend. Now, what is to be seen is that subsequently after the year 2010 or 11 or 12, will the rise in the trade surplus leads to a trade deficit in the US or UK. Now, that is something that one cannot say, because what will happen in future is what one cannot predict convincingly. But there is always a possibility that if India does well in service sector, there is a possibility that it has a detrimental impact on the US and the United Kingdom's trade surplus. The other is the impact of outsourcing on the US productivity, and if you bifurcate between service outsourcing, that is call centers, BPOs, the jobs, the back office operations taken up by the Indians and the firms in the developing nation, the percentage of total increase in productivity explained by each factor, service outsourcing contributes the most, 11% to 13%, material outsourcing contributes 3 to 6%, high technology equipment, that is computer, contributes 4 to 7%. So, one can see from here that if the developed nation indulges in service outsourcing, they have a maximum gain. The total increase in productivity is greater than when you have material outsourcing and high technology equipment. My last discussion point is the outsourcing in services, and why is this a focus of attention? Because Indians are doing quite well as far as providing these services to the developed nation. They can be call centers, back office operations, financial analytics, business processing outsourcing. So, Indians have really gained in terms of providing services to the developed nations. So, again there is a slicing taking place, the production process gets sliced, but now there is service outsourcing rather than manufacturing outsourcing. Now, how is it different? It is different because earlier the thinking was that in the developed nation there will be outsourcing of the jobs which will be unskilled labor intensive. Now, what is happening with outsourcing of services is that there are skilled intensive jobs which are being outsourced to India. And why is it? It is because in case of India, manufacturing outsourcing probably does not takes place because there is substantial trade cost, because of the infrastructure problem, or there are sometimes higher tariffs for certain products. But when it comes to service outsourcing, with the revolution that has taken place in information and communication technology, it is very easy to outsource services rather than manufacturing. Manufacturing outsourcing requires an efficient infrastructure, lower tariffs, lower trade costs. If India does not provide that, then what follows from there is that it can do or provide services at a lower cost to the developed nations, because the information and communication revolution has impacted India as well. Now, all this raises two questions. Does it contradict our ideas about international trade, such as the principle of comparative advantage? In what goods or service will the US or European countries retain their comparative advantage? Now you can bring in the Ricardian theory of international trade. Remember the Ricardian theory? The Ricardian theory said that trade will take place because of the differences in productivity. So Ricardian model was also talking about comparative advantage, but now the comparative advantage is due to differences in technology. So this particular service outsourcing can be explained by the Ricardian model of international trade. And you see differences in technology. Even India has an advantage in production of services because it has higher productivity in the service sector. In service activities, Indian workers are probably equally productive with their counterparts in developed countries. If we measure the productivity of call centers relative to the productivity of manufacturing industries, this ratio is much higher in India than in the US. So according to the Ricardian model, India has a comparative advantage in service activities because its opportunity cost is relatively low. So in the outsourcing model which we presented earlier, we used the value chain to show that home would produce the most skilled intensive and foreign would produce the least skill intensive. Now this assumption is contradicted by the outsourcing of business services to India. Activities such as writing computer code and R&D activities are done in India which are skilled intensive, and it is easy to transfer these activities to India because of the revolution in information and communication. We will examine our previous assumptions. The assumption was that the wages in general and the relative wage of unskilled workers were lower in foreign than in home. Now if you work that out, that will hold true. Now also, even in the service sector, if you will see that the wages of the unskilled workers would be lower than the wages of the skilled workers, but that is not the issue. The second assumption is that their extra cost of capital and trade in foreign were spread uniformly over all activities in the value chain. Now this assumption needs to be relaxed, not the first assumption. The first assumption remains the same, that we are a country of lower wages, so we will have lower wages. But the second assumption, that there are extra costs of capital and trade in foreign were spread uniformly over all activities, that is not true, because in India there will be an infrastructure cost, trade costs are higher. So it means that manufacturing outsourcing may not be a profitable activity, but service outsourcing may be more profitable. So the second assumption does not hold in India. The actual costs of outsourcing relatively unskilled manufacturing activities to India are much greater than the cost of outsourcing skilled service activities. While the service activities do not rely as much on transportation, but instead require reliable and cheap communication. So the communication infrastructure in India is very good, and they have a large number of well educated individuals who can speak English. This makes sense for the US and Europe to engage in service outsourcing with India, where India has a comparative advantage. So all in all, when we were discussing this chapter, first we discussed the model of outsourcing, wherein we said that the demand for skilled labor will increase with outsourcing, and then we went to the gains of outsourcing, and finally we are talking about outsourcing in services. So that is all about the outsourcing model. Tomorrow we will see and discuss how the issue of foreign direct investment or foreign direct investment have an impact on the returns to factors of production, whether FDI is desirable or not, and also we will discuss whether labor migration tends to reduce wages in the other countries, what will happen in the short and the long run. These are little sensitive issues, but we will give a theoretical argument on how does FDI and migration of labor have an impact on the returns to factors of production. Thank you so much.